Hello, you guys. She Loves God here. This video is kind of a part two to the previous video on evidence that the New Testament writings were historical. And it's very important that the New Testament, that the whole Bible, New Testament and Old Testament, are known to be historical. Because if they're not historical, then they're garbage. If the Bible was written by, as some would say, William Shakespeare in the 15th and 16th, or the 16th and 17th centuries, then we don't have to believe it because Jesus, was born 2,000 years ago. So this is a part two video. The first video was talking about how there is proof that the Bible was written in the very early centuries, meaning it's very historic. It was not written in the 16th and 17th century. It was written in the first century. Okay. But some would say, okay, we can't trust the Christian witness. The Christians, of course, are going to twist history. So we're going to step outside of Christianity for a minute, and we're going to see if we can see proof from other secular sources about the historicity, the validity, the truth, the accuracy of the New Testament. All right, so I'm going to read this. I'm going to quote this. Great excitement was aroused towards the end of last century and the beginning of this one by the discovery by B.P. Grenfell and A.S. Hunt at Oxyrhynchus of 3 papyrus fragments. That means they found traces from way back in the day, which is around not later than 140 A.D. They found some traces, they found some fragments, meaning, like, for example, they didn't find a whole sheet of paper. Maybe they found like the first half of the paper, or they found this middle part, or they found the end part. They just found a fragment of a papyrus. So it says these fragments contain things of Jesus. Now this, I'm not talking about the Bible. I'm not talking about anything Christian. I'm just talking about. I'm not talking about the Bible. I'm just talking about this Oxyrhynchus, or however you pronounce this, Oxyrhynchus. This Oxyrhynchus or Oxyrhynchus papyri, which is not dated later than AD 140, which means that's the second century. It contains things of Jesus. Now, if the Bible was written, like some would say, in the 16th and 17th centuries by William Shakespeare, how can somebody, Oxyrhynchus, quote him before 140? That's strange. Let's keep reading. It says some of these sayings of Jesus were similar to the sayings occurring in our Gospels. The Gospels, where they quote Jesus. And some of these sayings are very similar, while others had no known parallels. So some are similar, some are not. The discovery of otherwise unknown sayings of Jesus is not surprising. In the early days of the church, a great number of them must have been current, transmitted from one generation to another. Some of them could have been, he spoke to many crowds. Maybe some were transmitted orally. Somebody just said, I went to I went to this gathering when Jesus was speaking, and he said X, Y, Z. And he may tell his son. His son may go and tell the grandson, hey, my dad told me when I was little that Jesus said X, Y, Z. And it gets passed down orally. Another way to transfer information is written. So some stuff is written, some stuff is told orally, or it was spoken. Okay? So these Oxyrhynchus papyri, which were dated not later than AD 140, were not fragments of a gospel. They weren't like a fragment of John, Luke, Matthew, Mark. Like I said, let's say this is the Bible. Let's say, if I say, fragment, it means I don't have the whole old John, of the entire Matthew, the entire Mark, the entire Luke. I may have like a page, I may have 3 pages, I may have a paragraph here or there. That's what they mean when they say fragment. They mean they don't have the entire thing, they just have a fragment. But even a fragment is proof that it existed, that if there's a fragment, there must have been a hole. Can't have a puzzle piece without a whole puzzle. Can't have a crumb without the bread. All right. So these Oxyrhynchus papyri, which were dated not later than AD 140, were not fragments of a gospel like the papyri mentioned in an earlier chapter. They had formed part of collections of isolated sayings, each introduced by such words as Jesus said. These are people saying Jesus said, Jesus said, Jesus said. And like I said, they were not all quoted from the gospel. Some of the things they were saying Jesus said were not even in Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. That means that these are people who were around, maybe when Jesus was around, and they were quoting what they had heard Jesus say. Things that even Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John had not caught from their research when they wrote their gospel. Whether they are all genuine saints of Jesus is doubtful. But it is interesting that some of them represent Jesus as speaking in the way in which he speaks in the fourth gospel, though the resemblance is one of subject matter rather than style. So that's interesting, you know, that some people will say, oh, the Bible was written by William Shakespeare in 16th and 17th century. There's no way he could have quoted Jesus. He wasn't around when Jesus was around. But now we're hearing, oh, it's people were quoting him. And even if some of the quotes were doubtful, some of them were confirmed by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. In 1946, there was also discovered in Egypt a Coptic version of a work, originally composed in Greek, called the Gospel of Thomas, which consists of 114 sayings of Jesus. So, this is even more things attesting they're not Bible, they're just other writings that attest to the Bible. Here's another one. There's also the Qumran documents. They tell about the life and faith of a Jewish community which flourished for about 200 years between 130 BC to 80 70, which resembled the primitive Christian community. So there's other proofs. You don't have to just use the Bible to prove that the Bible was around. You can use outside sources. It's like, for example, you don't have to have Romeo and Juliet, a copy of Romeo and Juliet. You don't have to have William Shakespeare's actually handwritten copy. You can have copies of Romeo and Juliet. You can even have commentaries. Let's say we go 4,000 years from now, and every original copy or every copy of Romeo and Juliet is gone. If you find a commentary, or even those books called, those Spark Notes or Cliff Notes. If you see Cliff Notes, if you see a movie featuring Leonardo DiCaprio based off of Romeo and Juliet, you don't have to have the exact handwritten copy from William Shakespeare himself. You don't have to have the handwritten copy of Romans and Philippians from Apostle Paul himself. You don't have to have Jesus himself handwriting what he said, and then Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John recording it. You just have to have even commentary, other people who are mentioning it. You see a Romeo and Juliet costume or a poem or a quote. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. So these are other things that attest to the historicity of the New Testament. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.